Am I beautiful?
All right, looking good. Hello, welcome everybody.
Here we go again.
Yeah, Wild Wisdom and Storytelling with Blaine, the Herb Man.
The dynamic duo. I really like that between the two of us and our backgrounds, we've never had any dead air. Like as I segue or you segue, we've always got, like you're always waiting to get your minute in.
Yeah.
And we're working well.
Yeah, totally. And I don't think we've planned any of these. You know, I mean, there's been the odd prop or maybe a question that's come up that's given us a starting point. But yeah, always something to talk about for sure. And yeah, I thought maybe we'd start kind of jumping off our last one. So this is episode 6, episode 5. Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
and air.
And air, yeah.
And space and time.
Totally. Human origins, crystals, and one thing that really kind of struck me, and in fact it came up later in my week, was this idea of, you know, what is the role of humans? I mean, of course, that's a massive, massive topic, but I was listening to a guy named Charles Eisenstein, and he was articulating something of my own thoughts. And it definitely echoes what you and I have talked about. And yeah, it's this idea that, you know, he talks about kind of twofold, our kind of role, our purpose, our, you know, whatever it is. I think first and foremost, he says, you know, it's the ability to kind of receive, to be in wonder of nature. And that's definitely been a theme of our conversations, of being still enough, being, you know, observant enough. And this idea of like, well, you know, what is enlightenment? You know, to me, like you talked about, you know, the amaryllis flower or the scent of, you know, anything, right? Like that's like essential oils, the perfume. No, talk about something that can just put you just straight in the moment, straight in like absolute wonder. And I know you'll appreciate this. Like right now, it's the wolf willows that are just going off, right? Like a flower I personally find so intoxicating.
If we could organize, like the way jasmine is picked across the water, if we could organize school buses full of children,
right,
to pick the newly opened overnight wolf willow flowers, we would have a worldwide market to compete with jasmine, sort of thing. It's that beautiful.
Oh, totally.
And the other name being silverberry.
Right.
And it was used in jewelry for sure. I think they soaked the seeds overnight so they could pierce them, so they could string them.
Yeah.
I have a necklace somewhere that a student gave me
of the seeds.
That's on fishing line, I think. Mm-hmm. That I often wear when I'm doing a herb walk.
Yeah.
Just because I end up talking about wolf willow and.
Yeah.
But the flower is intoxicating. I had, Lord knows now, several in my front yard, and it'll spread from the roots.
Oh, okay.
Pups were coming up here and there.
Yeah.
And you could smell it a block away. Like I'd be coming back from the dog park, and I could just tell that they have opened.
But some people don't like it. You know, like Laura, she's so turned off by the smell.
Well, a lot of things that are used in perfume are actually virtually fecal.
Right.
And when you look at some of the top perfumes in history, there's things like, gosh, I haven't done that class for so long. It's the same cats that are in Africa. They're the ones that eat the coffee beans, and then you end up with, I hope they wash them, this really, really, really expensive coffee.
Yeah, come out the backside of a cat.
Well, they have these mucus glands a little way up their bum, and that's what they I've seen footage of this where here's this African man with big arms, and he's just got a forked stick. He goes in first and just slams a cat down with the stick around its neck, so his head's one end, the body's the other, so that his buddy can come along with the little spoon and go up and scrape up into the fecal matter.
Wow.
Civet. That's what they're called.
Okay, yeah.
Civet cats. And the stuff that we get from whales, gosh, what's that called? It might come to me. It's actually mucus. It's sort of a cross between puke and mucus. When a whale comes up from a deep dive and does that blowhole,
Right.
it's kind of like a sneeze.
Yeah.
And then it floats and it comes to the sand.
Really?
Ambergris.
Oh.
And or ambergris, some people say.
Yeah.
And that stuff's worth, if you got a chunk this big, you could buy McMahon Stadium. No, what's it called now? Anyway, you could buy half the buildings downtown. It's that valuable.
No way.
You know, and it gets cut and stretched into perfumes, and now most of it's synthetic.
Right.
But, you know, that old expression of Grandpa sees you coming down in your prom dress down the stairs and gives you this up and down look and said, well, aren't you just the cat's ass? and that's because the best perfumes would come out on a night like that.
Wow.
And they were literally made from civet, which came from the cat's bum. That's where that expression comes from.
No way.
So,
And then they changed it to the cat's meow. Yeah.
yeah, a little more polite.
Yeah.
But
That's so interesting. It reminds me of this, and it's totally true, this idea that a lot of artificial, well, I guess it would be a natural flavor that they create, but comes from beaver anal glands.
musk,
Yeah.
right?
Like strawberry and this kind of a thing, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of people, jasmine is the same thing. I remember one girlfriend was over for a visit or a dinner or something, and I had her smell my favorite. It's a blend of 2 different jasmines with just a whisper of ginger added.
Right.
And she was like, what's that?
Yeah.
She was disgusted. And the next time she came over, I took a 10% cut of just one of the jasmines and ran it under her nose, and she almost purred.
Wow.
It's like, oh. Because if it's too strong,
Right.
you know, then it's disgusting. It's fecal.
Right. Interesting.
But that's when, you know, when 2 dogs meet in the park, they have a rough idea of what's going on, who this dog is by their body language. But the first thing they do is go end to end.
Right.
They don't have language like we do, but there's a whole lot of story
Yeah.
coming from their other ends. So they're sniffing each other's backsides,
Right.
and they instantly know who your grandma was and how healthy you are and
Yeah.
where you go regular. Like a whole lot of who you are is in that bottom zone.
Yeah.
And so some of our most beautiful flowers are, it's when I've been out with people and like you, I smell a little on the wind and it's, oh,
Yeah.
gosh. And somebody else goes, did a bear die here or something? You know, what's wrong with the air?
Yeah. But interesting kind of connection that ties that plant and those 2 aspects together is, have you ever, and I hope you haven't, roasted a hot dog or a marshmallow with a wolfwillow stick?
That's what people used to do if you had somebody tie along that you didn't like. You told them to go make their sticks from that tree, that bush, because the bark getting slightly burnt smells exactly like somebody pooped in the campfire.
That's right.
Yeah.
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 I've never done it, but the legend is strong enough that I will never, you know. But yeah, practical joke on somebody. But you know, this idea of I really loved how you shared that idea of like the perfume through smoke, you know, like to reach God. But you know, isn't that the scent? Like that's everything, right? Like whether your sense is through smell, especially that direct connection to our brain, to our consciousness, like to be able to receive and take life in. I mean, when you're in that moment of just complete, just like rapture from the aroma of jasmine, of wolfwillow, of whatever it is, rose, like, can you not get a higher state, you know, like in our physical form here on earth?
Rose is good quality rose. Well, for perfume, we usually use the absolute, but good quality rose essential oil carries a higher frequency than almost anything else that we're aware of.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just smiling because a baby bunny just ran up your sidewalk.
Oh, yeah.
And so it knows this is a good place to be
Yeah.
instead of running across the neighbor's lawn. Smart little bunny.
This is a safe
Just
place
so-
for bunnies,
so
for
cute.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had again a question or two that came in. Somebody named Laura was wondering about hay fever
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. And this is something I suffered from a lot as a child. I always thought every year at around now when it was final exam time, I thought I always got a cold. And it was never a cold, it was an allergy. Oh, there it is again. See?
Yeah.
Could you see it from where you are?
Yeah, totally.
It's a grown-up bunny, but not fully grown. It's
Teenage.
this year.
Yeah.
And there were things like it became an excuse if the lawn was too high and full of weeds. I just couldn't mow the lawn because I'd be sneezing for the rest of the day and my eyes would swell up. And we never made the connection that it was actually like a hay fever type thing. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the pictures I had the other day was showing, and I'd forgotten the name of they're called mast cells.
Right.
A particular type of white blood cell that's sort of built like a piñata. Mm-hmm. And if it's triggered, it explodes out a whole bunch of little granules, and those are histamine granules.
Yeah.
And they're trying to do you a favor because they think for some reason that you are deathly allergic to, say, geraniums. So what they want to do is help you flush the geranium threat away. Mm-hmm. So you start with the snot and the eyes
Right.
and everything, because that's their job, is to flush it out of your body.
Yeah.
But you take it as not convenient. They're horrible symptoms. And so what do we take? An antihistamine.
Yeah.
So as I was mentioning, some of the essential oils that I've worked with, they don't work so well as an antihistamine as a prehistamine. Mm. And if there's something you know is a trigger, like for somebody on a farm just going into the granary or the bins or something like that might trigger it, you would use the oils before exposure.
Right.
And the same as if you have something like a cold, do we get cold from the drinking water? Do we get it from your food? We get it off the air, right? Viruses are so tiny they can flutter in the air. That's why they're airborne. And so we got the infection from the air. So I think the treatment might be better if it came from the air.
Right.
And that's why I call using them full strength an airstrike. Mm. So you can take it, close your eyes. I think I mentioned this the other day. Don't cover your eyes. And quite often, depending on how clear your airways, you may start coughing with some of them. Good, cough.
Yeah.
And you breathe it real deep. So one of the oils that might help a lot, even though I'm allergic to it, I can eat it, I can put it in salads, I can make salad dressing with it, I can tie it up for smudge, but it's the pollen that gets me.
Right.
So when I'm stuffing wine bottles full of tarragon to make vinegar, bunny's right there now.
Yeah.
It's such gentle beasts, eh?
Yeah.
I feel guilty for how many of them I've eaten over the years. Not lately. It's just sort of interesting how I can use the oils straight up,
Yeah.
but it's the pollen that gets me. So I don't know how that even fits. I could probably use that. That would be the pollen gets me, but I could use it homeopathically as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a lot. You hear a lot of people talking negatively about mucus.
Right.
And the truth is, you would never want to spend 10 minutes of your life without mucus.
No.
You would be at high risk of infection. You would have a hard time digesting foods. You'd be constipated. You certainly wouldn't be able to have sex.
Yeah.
Like we need mucus, but it should be nice, thin, flowing stuff.
Right.
Not all hard as a lump and clogged up. And
Yeah.
when we're over-consuming mucus foods, it gets heavy and sticky. And if you have nice, clean airways, that's another picture I could have shown you. The mucus comes out, and there's all these cells that are lining all of your airways that they come out. They almost look like little punk hairdos. They come up, and they have all these little hairs on the top, so that when you breathe in, they trap things like pollen and dust and dead skin and all sorts of other things, and they're somehow designed, as you exhale, to move that stuff closer to the door. So they're like little brooms sweeping up the airways, and you have a bit of mucus on them. So as you sleep, for example, or you've just been sitting at a desk all day, you're breathing things in, and your body traps it up with mucus that slowly gets swept up towards your mouth, and periodically you clear your throat and you swallow it, and that's okay because your stomach acids are capable of handling most microbes, or you spit it out.
Yeah.
But in a proper clean running body, they don't cause any problems. We need mucus. But when it's overproduced and gets heavy and sticky, it's called catarrh.
Right.
And just before one of my conferences in California, I thought it was funny. I was looking something up in one of the, I'm forgetting the name of it's like a medical dictionary. Anyway, I looked up catarrh, and all it said was obsolete.
Oh.
And I started laughing because I thought, well, the term may be, but the condition certainly isn't. In fact, because of processed foods, catarrh is worse than it's ever been in our culture.
Right.
Right. But I'm still laughing about that now that I think of it. Obsolete. No, it's not. So anyway, we get a lot of that, and you might breathe something in, and once it's into the mucus, it's crawling around slowly, looking for the best place to hide and start a family and further its kind, like most organisms do. And one of the popular places, it might crawl up into the inner ear because it's not windy there.
Right.
Like being in the middle of your bronchial tubes is like living in Lethbridge or something. It's so windy all the time, right?
Yeah.
But, it's very calm here because, of course, your eardrum blocks the flow, right? So your eustachian tubes, I think they're called, if you you can just hold a pencil up from the bottom of your ear to the edge of your mouth, and that's about the line that the tube's running on. So when you're treating them from the outside with essential oils, you never, ever, 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 ever put oils directly into the ear,
Right.
even if they're diluted. That tissue's so sensitive. But you can use them even at 10% up around the ear, and then follow with gentle stroking, little pitter-patters, stroking down towards the mouth, and that'll help. It's almost like manual lymphatic drainage. That's going to help stimulate the movement back towards your mouth, and then it's going to come out as spit or make you cough more. When you breathe them deep, if you're full of, it's always fun in a large classroom. I pass some things like eucalyptus around. I always use the one that's got the least amount of ketones in it first. And if a couple of people start really coughing when they do an airstrike with that particular eucalyptus, like there's 700 kinds of eucalyptus, right? Their chemistry is extremely variable. So some of them are quite high in ketones. And if they start coughing when they breathe the first one, I always smile and say, you ain't seen nothing yet. And sure enough, when the one with the ketones in it comes around, they're almost laying on the floor. They're coughing so hard. Wow. So that's somebody that needs to cough because they're all clogged up. They're the first one in the room that's going to catch the cold that's going around. Right? So I'm thinking about, I had a friend for a while years ago. I did photography of her art for her, and she worked at the Dairy Nutrition Council. And every time I phoned her at the office, I'd start laughing. And I'd say, Joe, you just can't use those words together. It's an oxymoron. It's like saying military intelligence office. I mean, they just don't belong together. You know, because they'll show you little pictures like, here's a cup of cottage cheese and a cup of broccoli, and they have the same amount of calcium. And that's true. But what they don't show you is the phosphorus levels. And our body wants to have a certain continuum between the calcium and the phosphorus. So it's a little bit like getting a fat paycheck, but 80% of it goes to taxes. Right. You know, you don't have enough money to pay the rent, right? So mothers of our culture have been brainwashed to think that dairy product is actually the only way that your kids can get calcium to make strong bones and teeth and all of that. When in reality, and I'm sure this comes up in your work, the highest sources of usable calcium come from whole grains and things like broccoli and whatnot that you can put in a smoothie, right? So, and so many kids said broccoli, but make a smoothie with it or whatever. All of the mustard family, the crucifera family, do I have that right? Brassica.
Brassica, yeah.
Are very high in usable calcium, and sneak it in there somehow, or just get more whole grains in their diet.
Right.
And forget about milk and so. Or if it's been fermented, like personally, I am really allergic to milk or ice cream, but I can eat real yogurt
Yeah.
or any properly made cheese by the handful, even daily, and I don't have any problems at all.
Yeah.
So a lot of these foods, it depends on how they've been processed and handled and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But anyway, so many children have clogged eustachian tubes,
Right.
and that's why they end up with ear infections. So we want to, again, working with the oils around the ear and gentle strokes down towards the mouth. You don't have to take anything internally, but air strikes would work, and if it's a really young, like an infant or something, you can just take the oils on your own hands and hold them over a little baby's face.
Yeah.
And they might sputter for a few minutes, but that's okay, because that's what we're trying to do, is clean
Right.
those pipes out, right?
And what do you think of diffusers as a way to just kind of get it into the air?
Well, that's a great idea. It's just not as powerful as doing an airstrike.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
But I was telling you earlier, I was just looking, doing some Google schmoogling just yesterday, in fact, and the day before, about Dr. Lister, who I've always credited in talks about. He was a young experimental oral surgeon, and he was having trouble because so many of his patients at times would even die as a result from the surgery because our mouths are so filthy. But he's the one, and I didn't realize this, he was a full-fledged surgeon, born in the late 1800s. I think he died in 1920. So for that period in time, living to 85 was a pretty good long life. And before his time, hospital rooms, surgical suites were just disgusting.
Yeah.
They would clean some of the equipment with vinegar,
Right.
and he somehow stumbled onto carbolic acid, which was used to make sewage less stinky. And
Right.
he started experimenting with that, and he's actually the one who invented the first diffuser.
Oh.
So he started diffusing carbolic acid into surgical suites.
No way.
But it's quite caustic because of the phenol content. And so the doctors would end up, they'd cough and sputter, it would be hard on their skin. So if you get a bottle of pure lab phenol, you might find it in the closet in a hospital room. The first thing you see is one of the, whatever the symbol is for no hands.
Right.
Don't get it on your hands, right? Because
Yeah,
it's really,
yeah.
really hard on the skin. So it took them a while to figure that out. But Dr. Lister, and we still used, it was him that started doing oral irrigations with some, and this is before anesthesia.
Right.
If you can imagine a room full of negative microbes, and no anesthesia, and they're literally opening your chest up,
Yeah.
trying to experimentally work on a heart problem. It's
Right.
like it was
Wow.
almost cruel back then. So we've gotten past most of that, right? But I believe totally that every bit, like airplanes for sure, like especially on an overseas flight, if you're going to find your seat, you may as well be walking in and say, "Hi, I'm Malcolm," and just lick everybody's face, because by the end of the flight, you pretty much have, right?
Yeah.
Every little fart and sputter and cough is in the air,
Yeah.
and it's being recirculated. So sick building disease, like we get buildings downtown. As a photographer, I've gotten to photograph some of the engineering that goes into, I always wondered what that steam was that on a hot summer's day.
Oh, yeah.
Why is there steam coming out of
Right.
a big building downtown, like a 30-story building? The air conditioning, they actually create their weather.
Huh.
They have chambers that are as much as 2 stories tall, where it's a snowstorm.
No
And
way.
they pass all of the air through the blizzard, and that's what cools the air down, right?
Right.
So it's not like a home air conditioner at all. But some of the water to keep the air humid is absolutely disgusting.
Right.
And that should have some essential oils in it.
Yeah.
And even at home, and this is back to dealing with allergies, if you have an old-style forced air furnace, there's nothing wrong with putting a few drops. If it's easily accessible, you can just open a door and slide it out, for example. Just put a few drops right on your furnace filter.
Right.
Or depending on what kind of vacuum you have, I'm a Miele fan myself, you take your vacuum, take the hose off, if it'll work without a bag, just take the bag out. Some of them won't work without a bag to protect themselves, so you have to put a new bag in. But put a few drops of essential oils. If you hate vacuuming and you like jasmine, put some jasmine on the exhaust filter. You'll just be, I'm going to vacuum all morning here. Wow, what a great job.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to go out and buy new apparatus.
Right.
For quite a while, when I started lecturing to larger audiences, and I would always like to get in early, get my stuff organized, and do what a lot of people call just ground the room. And something I would do would be to take a blend of oils, and I would just walk down and across the front and back up the other aisle with a bottle of oils, pure oils, just going, and about every 5 feet, let a drop of oils fall into the carpets.
Right.
So by the time the audience was arriving, they'd all walk in and go,
Yeah.
instead of walking around trying to spritz something that's at 5% or whatever to smell up the room.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm not knocking diffusers. I used to sell them. They're a good idea. And if you have, I'm remembering one of my former students had a child that, if we go back to and I formally, just officially, no questions asked, believe in the Chinese clock in Chinese medicine.
Oh, yeah.
That all of the organs and things are, so 1 to 3 is liver.
That's right.
3 to 5 is,
Like small intestines.
and there is bowels in there somewhere, and that's why when you wake up in the morning, you might want to go have a poo right away.
Yeah, it's like 6 to 8,
But,
somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I'm forgetting it exactly, but
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah, it's 3 to 5, I think, is lungs.
Oh,
so they
right.
had a young child who would wake up the whole house every night coughing.
Right.
Had a lot of lung problems. So we put a diffuser in, I think it was her bedroom, on a timer. So the diffuser would cut in at exactly that time, and the child, I have to be careful about saying never woke up again, because that would sound like we killed it. But the whole coughing, or him, her, it isn't proper. But that's a perfect application. Diffuser right beside the bed.
Yeah, yeah.
And it cuts in for direct effect.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd have to come in. And that's why a lot of people find it odd that where you have more pores than anywhere else on your body is the soles of your feet. So the old trick that grandma might have used was some crushed garlic or whatever. Somebody's got a chest cold and you rub crushed garlic on your feet. Like, how stupid is that? But as your blood flows, the garlic oils, or onion could be used as well, get into the bloodstream fairly quickly.
Yeah.
You can crush up a garlic clove on the floor and just rub your feet and breathe deep for about 2 minutes, and you got garlic on your breath. I mean, it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
That it's working. So you can treat a really sore throat, tonsillitis even, with stuff on your feet.
Yeah, that's
so
amazing.
During the day, while you're awake, you're doing air strikes, but then when you go to sleep at night, you rub some oils on, and just to not waste it all on your bed sheets, put a sock on.
Yeah.
And we're treating even a pneumonia by the feet.
Right.
That's totally real.
Yeah, 100%.
So
and good tactic for the plane too, right?
yeah, I think that there should be the air circulating in there should have a few drops of something nice. Like even citruses are pretty. They're light and they're very inexpensive, and they're not antibiotic, but they're antiseptic, which would keep the air a lot cleaner. For people that work there, as I mentioned, that when SARS broke out, I had people asking, some of them being professionals like flight attendants, and I said, well, okay, so you don't want to reek of, like, what's the problem if you do an airstrike right before a flight, so you smell like you had a cough drop? Is anybody really going to complain? But if that's a problem, or when the infection was at its worst, you've got your little uniform has an orange it's not a scarf, whatever we call it, but
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Sash kind of thing.
Just put a couple drops on that before every flight. And it'll be right under your face. You know, there you go. And it'll be a little more subtle
Yeah.
than doing an airstrike.
Yeah.
But I call them airstrikes, and typically your hands are pretty tough too. I mean, right now my hands aren't going to be that tough because I'm not using tools or chopping wood or anything like that, but it's still tougher skin than my face.
Yeah.
So put a couple of drops there, rub your hands, close your eyes, breathe deep. And for that, we can use some of what I call the big guns.
Right.
If something hasn't responded to lavender or eucalyptus or whatever, that's when we get out something high in phenols, like red thyme is my favorite, or oregano. And the two big phenols there are carvacrol and thymol. So thymol is mostly thymol, or thyme, sorry, is mostly thymol with some carvacrol, and then oregano is the other way around.
Right.
Where it's as much as 80% in a really good oregano. With the carvacrol, sorry, I'm thinking about clove in the same breath. Clove is eugenol, right? So
Right.
carvacrol and a little bit of thymol, but either or.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have those options because, for example, you may hate the smell of eucalyptus because your grandmother used to take spoons of it and stick it up your nose when you had a cold.
Yeah.
But there's a particular lavender called spike lavender that has virtually an identical gas chromatogram, identical breakdown of components to eucalyptus, but it smells rather like lavender.
Interesting.
But it's not so much like lavender, like maybe you don't like lavender because grandma it was just everywhere in her house. So you can switch. And that's why I always encourage people working with oils, herbs in general, to get to know the chemistry a little bit because it helps you make substitutions.
Right.
You know, there was a year not that long ago when there was a civil war in Madagascar, and that's where we get some of our best clove, ylang ylang,
Right.
some of my favorite crystals, a lot of things. And the people that go out wildcrafting couldn't even get gas for their trucks to go out and wildcraft. So I was worried that we weren't going to get any clove oil for the whole winter.
Right.
And that's in a lot of the clove's a nice addition because when you smell it, you can feel the warmth all the way deep into your lungs.
Right.
You know, so I like to use, I've had people, the phone rings and it's somebody from a massage studio just a few blocks away saying, Blaine, are you around anywhere? Could I send a client over? There's somebody here that really needs somebody, sure. And as soon as they walk in the door, oh, don't be giving me any of that yucca, that stinky, I don't want any of that. And so to use something with eucalyptus in it, they're just going to turn them off. They just won't use it. If you force the sale, they'll put it in a drawer. They won't use it, but they need it. So when you put things like basil and clove, the same blend smells like licorice and just warmth.
Right.
And they'll smell it and smile because they can just feel all of the heat go down into their lungs. And now it's going to work.
Cool.
Because it doesn't work in the drawer.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, when you talk to anybody in our industry about what's the biggest problem with ineffectivity, it's compliance.
Right. Yes. Compliance. The herbs don't work unless you take them.
Yeah. So we had this little formula, R equals E times C, or no, R equals E times C. Results come as a combination of effectivity of the product with the compliance of the user.
Yeah.
And that applies to almost everything we sell, right?
And speaking of substitutions, a wild plant that grows around here, many are familiar with, is the Monarda, the wild oregano, sometimes it's called, or bee balm. Beautiful little plant, these like little pink flowers, and it's full of carvacol, isn't it?
Yes, and I always bring that one up on Herb Walks because if there was ever the end of times and we weren't shipping or anything anymore, thanks for bringing that up. Monarda fistulosa. A lot of the ones that you can buy now at a garden center that are 3 feet tall and come in 6 new flower colors and stuff. They're still good for the butterflies,
Yeah.
but they have almost no carvacrol.
Yeah.
They'll have some linalool,
Right.
so there's still a little bit infection fighting, but it's kind of like long-stemmed red roses for Valentine's Day don't really have that much smell.
Yeah.
Where the oil that we're getting from when you buy the essential oil are from those big bush roses that are in bloom for a few months, and the flowers are about this big, and they're not really even that pretty.
Yeah.
But they've got the scent.
Yes.
That's so heavy, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's it. And it's just smelling it. And yarrow is very similar too, isn't it? Like I can tell the difference between wild yarrow and a cultivated variety.
Yeah.
Partly by looking at it, but
Yeah.
100% just by smelling
Yeah,
it.
the leaves are a little different. Leaves that are finely divided like that are called pinnately divided. And some of them almost look like feathers. And the domestic ones aren't as finely divided as the wild ones.
Yeah, that's true.
You can take a wild yarrow plant and crush it, and it's not sweet, it's a herbaceous smell, not a pretty
Yeah.
smell, but it's powerfully strong.
Yeah.
Where some of the regular stuff that might be growing under that spruce tree over there doesn't, there goes that bunny again. Your yard is like a total playpen for these guys.
Until the bobcat comes.
Until the bobcat comes, yeah. It's all over in a hurry. Where did I sidebar there? So anyway, a lot of hybrids that are made for beauty lose their
Right.
medicinal effects.
And the same is true with food, you know? Like we select, because it's got a nice thick skin.
Strawberry is
it's
this
going-
big and would make a good picture and have less flavor than a wild strawberry that's this big. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's mostly water and sugar.
Yeah. Well, that Monarda plant, just to kind of touch on it again, then we'll circle back to some other topics, is, horse mint, right? That idea of like rubbing it, like put it in the horse's face and put a
Yeah.
little jig in their step,
Well, another name for it is wild bergamot, because the tea made from it smells rather like Earl Grey.
Right.
And so back to talking about oils, and the citrus oils smell beautiful, but it's not concentrated orange juice, so it's not going to taste good in a cake or whatever.
Right.
Because it comes from the rinds. We touched on that the other day. All of the citrus oils are very bitter, and most of them are really inexpensive because the people that make orange juice have to peel all that fruit, the rind off the fruit, otherwise nobody would buy their juice.
Right.
The one exception would be bergamot, or some people like to call it bergamot, like it's French, and I go, no, it's Mediterranean, okay? If you want to go all the way with making it proper, it's bergamo, huh? Bergamo! Bergamot's fine, we're English.
Yeah.
But, the rinds are what they use to make Earl Grey.
Right. And is it typically pressed or is it steam distilled? Like how do they produce the oils from because I know when you press a rind, if anybody's got some citrus in the house, that kind of like squirt that comes out, there's water, but that's also carrying the essential oils, isn't it?
Yeah. You're right. They're cold pressed.
Right.
The same as a seed oil would be.
Yeah.
And so some of the ones, like bergamot essential oil, is more expensive than orange or lemon would be because it's actually grown for the rinds.
Right.
I think the fruit itself would be, I've never eaten one, but
Yeah.
a lot of people would call a lemon bitter. I wouldn't say bitter, I think it's tart.
Right.
So bergamot, they're not orange, they're lime colored. In fact, they're about that size. They look like a lime.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how the flavor in the fruit would be.
Yeah.
But I've never seen bergamot juice.
No.
So I'm assuming that it's not a nice taste.
Yeah.
But the rinds are grown for the tea and or the essential oil exclusively. So it's no longer a recovery sidebar of a waste product industry.
Right.
They're grown for the rinds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one that's absolutely just intoxicating is neroli or orange blossom.
Yeah, I love neroli. Neroli is almost hypnotic. It's very highly rated for things like menopause. It's one that, if we take the top three sort of perfume oils, it would usually be jasmine, rose, and neroli.
Right.
And it's almost hypnotic. No matter whether you wanted to or not, it almost forces you. I'm giggling to myself here that it's forcing you to relax.
Right.
It's funny, that's an odd combination of words, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to force you to relax. Molly, you're just being overactive this morning. I'm going to force you to relax. Smell this. But yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah.
And stress-induced headaches, that sort of thing. And it's kind of right up there price-wise with rose and jasmine as well.
Yeah. Have you ever worked with Lewis's mock orange? Are you familiar with that one?
I know the plant. I've never worked with it. There's one of the landscapers, I guess when the park was first initiated, I've lived for years beside Rotary Park.
Yeah.
Right up at the top of the Center Street Bridge there, and tennis courts and lawn bowling and off-leash dog park and all that. And the park has an incredible number of diverse species that kind of don't belong there.
Right, including goji, you told me one time.
There's a lot of gojis there that people
Yeah.
just wouldn't recognize, and they're growing in. It's not like they're out in the middle of the dog park or whatever with a sign on them. They're growing along the hillsides with Center Street traffic below.
Yeah.
And whoever arranged all of that, like there's 2 pear trees.
Oh.
They're small and red pears. They're a little woody, but they're tasty and they're good. And if you let them fully ripen, they're very nice. But back to mock orange, there's a couple of mock orange bushes there too.
Right.
And if you just walk by, I'm used to the bushes being about, I guess I'm still on camera there, maybe 5 feet across and 4 feet high or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're having a tough day and it's in bloom, you can just walk by and just kind of go like this and give it a couple of strokes and stick your face in it.
Totally.
And yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah, I've got one out the back off my deck that's probably about 15 feet high,
Oh,
and
great.
7 feet across, and so I've been working with it because I love it in that sense, and so I've done a hydrosol with it, and then I also did a honey infusion. I love honeys or herbal honeys because they're able to capture and maintain that delicate flower essence.
Right.
So it worked really, really well, and then even doing like a syrup with it. Alcohol, you got to do a very low percentage in order to kind of, not get
Or
overpowered.
it'll just stink with the alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. So I've done a syrup with it too. And
Oh, I'm delighted to hear that.
yeah, I'm interested to see what I'll do with it this year. And I haven't really come across anything about the benefits, the effects of it, other than just my own experience, like you say, like just like,
Yeah,
I like
just
this.
soothing. It's used a lot in perfumes. And that's one of the ones that there's a word enfleurage, which mustn't be confused with a word effleurage, which is a massage technique of just really light strokes
Right.
for relaxation as opposed to deep tissue work.
Right.
And because I used to do a lot of work with massage students, I used to always have to emphasize that.
Yeah.
But in the old days, and still rarely done with jasmine, you'd have a bunch of pickers that would be out. Flowers like jasmine lose a lot of their fragrance as soon as the sun's bright in the sky. So the children are out there with baskets, hand picking them early in the morning for a couple hours before the sun comes up. And as soon as the sun is on the horizon, like it's just up,
Right.
that's the end of your shift.
Wow.
And I found when I was in California for a while, there was a huge vine next door that had come over a 9-foot fence and completely covered a wall that was growing on it. And we were going sailing for the day, and I thought, well, I have to try this. And I went and picked some of the just open flowers. and smell them. And I love jasmine. And then when we came back from sailing at about 5 in the afternoon, you could see where the sun was on the lawn from the 9-foot fence. And the ones that had been in the sun for several hours were almost flat.
Right.
So it anchored that in my mind about what I'd heard about they picked them early in the morning. And that's what we would probably have to do with Wolf Willow too.
Right.
Buses of school children, not slaves.
Yeah.
We're going to somehow compensate them.
And I think that would work well in a honey too, is my guess, to put little petals in honey. In terms of ingesting it, I don't really know if
I don't know if they taste like much.
Yeah.
But you said honeys, no?
I was thinking of honeys as a way to kind of capture that really delicate essence. I don't think I'm about to collect enough to do a hydrosol. Oil infusions, just dropping in oil. I'm not sure if that would be strong enough. What kind of neutral of an oil could you use? Like lilac, for instance, don't transfer well into oil, but they make great honey and great hydrosols, kind of like the mock orange.
Yeah, in the old days with either of them, the flowers were picked and they would have been porcelain probably in the old days, trays, and there'd be a large group of women in the shed there that would put out a layer of usually pork fat, like say lard, about 1/2 inch deep, and then line up just cover it with flowers, not 2 inches deep, just flower by flower, edge to edge kind of thing. Cover the fat, and then put another tray on top of that, and another tray on top. They'd stack up all these trays, and in the old days it was all done by the master, just like winemakers and whatnot, where Uncle Rajmani or whoever would come and take a bit of the fat. He thinks it's about time, and he'd smell and go, no, another 2 days. And then they would take all those flowers away and bring fresh flowers in, and they would do that until the fat was saturated.
Right.
And in the old days, that was the end product, was the fat. It was called a pomade.
A pomade.
And you would do things like, if we go back to, say, Victorian England, where we would be sitting in court all day, and waking up this morning, I'd have a valet on me immediately, hearing me stirring, who would come and brush my hair for me and dress me and whatever. And before the wig goes on, they'd put a chunk of that fat on top of your head. And then as you sit in court all day, a little bit from your scalp heat bit would melt. And every once in a while, a little trickle would go down your back, or for women down between their breasts. And that was sort of an early deodorant.
Right.
And or perfume, if you wish, but they didn't call them deodorants back then. So if I hadn't had a bath, I've been married twice, and so I may be my age and only had a bath twice for my weddings. You just stacked on more fragrance.
Right.
And then once distilled alcohol came along in 1725, they would soak the fat in the alcohol so that they could get it back into a liquid state, and then through something called vacuum distillation, which I think is just, it's capturing the fragrance with evaporation, but in a forced way.
Right.
Then you would end up with the thick liquid that now we sell in little bottles.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that's called an enfleurage. And when the petrochemical industry was evolving, we got these solvents like hexane and benzene, and that does away with using the fat entirely.
Right.
It's cheaper and faster. And then they have methods of getting the hexane and benzene residues out of the finished product, and that spooks a lot of people. They don't want to use absolutes, but they don't realize that those are the same two solvents that are used if you buy some salad dressing. I'm going to pick on Kraft here, but any brand, unless it says cold pressed,
Right.
The oils are pressed first. That's the cold pressed oils, and you get most of the oil out of them.
Yeah.
But a lot of oil is still in that seed.
Right.
So they soak them in solvent, usually warm them up just a bit, it's not boiling or anything, and then press them again.
Right.
And then use those same hexane benzene is what they're soaked in. And then they've got a process, I think it involves long vertical tubes with bubbling nitrogen gas through them or something. But they get the solvents out to the place where they're like 3 parts per thousand or something, and the government says that's safe to consume.
Right.
So any non-cold pressed oil that you buy, which is what's in most salad dressing type products, mayonnaise and things,
Yeah.
it uses the same solvents. So I wouldn't worry about. Occasionally, coming out of countries like Egypt or whatever, where they got orders coming in, but they can't get any hexane or benzene, they might use evil things like acetone
Right.
or whatever. And so if you get an absolute offered to you and you think there's even a whisper of solvent smell to it, you don't want to buy that.
Right.
And I had a friend come back from Egypt once with his jasmine that he bought, and he was so thrilled with it because he'd smell it and he'd get trippy on it. And I took it away from him and said, no, you're getting trippy on a bunch of solvent smells.
Oh, no.
And if you sniff this enough, you'll probably have a seizure.
Right.
So don't sell it. Or sometimes what you can do is just leave it in an open bottle, maybe with some Jiffy cloth or something with a rubber band around to keep the flies out. But just put it out in the garage or something and let it air
Right.
for a while, because the solvents will air out.
Yeah, volatilize off.
And then you can still use it and
Right.
whatever.
So that's the behind the term absolute. When
Yeah.
you see, you'd mentioned earlier, rose absolute, jasmine absolute.
Yep. And the big advantage is there's no heat degradation.
Right.
So a rose absolute smells just like the fresh flowers did, but rose essential oil smells completely different.
Yeah.
And because things like pigments and waxes come along, a lot of the first phase of before it's an absolute, they're solid because of the waxes.
Oh.
I remember running into, in California, somebody had, it was like the size of a hockey puck in a little one of those aluminum things that we use for spices and things. And it was $4,000 worth of carnation, absolute. And if you just rubbed your finger across it,
Wow.
it was just this huge hit
Yeah.
of fragrance, but that was probably $20 worth,
Yeah, yeah.
So if they're properly done, absolutes don't need to be feared. And we use them a lot in more fragrance work, where we want to do spiritual work with rose, you really must have the essential oil.
Right.
I forget the exact hertz that it is, but it's higher than anything you can see out there by a long shot. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like every part of your body has a frequency. The wooden canoe you showed me has a frequency. Every rock has a frequency. Back to when you asked me about rocks the other day, just about anything that you can touch and hold. And so back to this allergies thing.
Yeah.
That's where we started.
Yeah, I've got a few threads to pull back on that.
If
so.
you, it's sort of handy to remember that, I'll say mostly so. I guess the first thing I tell my botany students is every rule that you learn in this class is not 100%.
Right.
Because it's human beings, mostly men, that have to put things in columns and boxes, and nature's pretty random. So there's exceptions to every rule
Yeah.
that I'm going to tell you. Okay? So mostly so. We can, where the hell was I going with that one? Gosh, no.
Start on the thread with allergies. We were going to circle back
Oh,
to
yes.
that.
So mostly so, thank you. That was my first dead airspace on your show. Mostly so, if we start with the roots, some roots turn into essential oils, like vetiver
Right.
is one of them, spelt with or without a T, is very, very grounding. I learned to, I only rode a horse a couple of times. I didn't grow up on a farm. So I'm a little bit nervous around big animals. And if you're nervous, they know right away.
Yeah.
Like if you're nervous, a horse knows half a block away. And there was, I'd been called up to a big riding facility somewhere west of Airdrie, huge facility. The stables there were gigantic, like a block long. And before even leaving the truck, I thought, well, I have to calm down. And I took a bit of vetiver and just did like an airstrike with it. So I was flat calm. But the scent is pretty strong. And I remember when I walked into the stable, horses at the far, like half a block away, were sticking their heads out and turning around, cranked and saying, "Who's the new guy?" You know? But there was a young horse that had got its leg, one of its legs caught in a three-strand barbed wire or three-strand wire fence, and just freaked out. And it was doing this for quite a while before somebody found it.
Right.
And there was an injury about this long on its leg that looked like a cougar had eaten it or something. And what could I help them with herb-wise? And with me, I took some of my strong comfrey extract and a few other things. But in addressing, I know a lot of people now that use vetiver in the show arena. So you got this nervous thoroughbred.
Right.
And just before you go out, you're just being really kind, stroking the horse's nose. Talk about an aromatherapy subject. You got a nose this big. You get it on your hands and just, stroke like you usually would, just saying hello and being kind and patting them, and with some vetiver on your hands, and they just calm right down. So roots like vetiver, which is a tropical grass, so it's literally, we talk about grass roots,
Right.
It's the base of things, would be one that's very well known. And as you work up the tree, if it's a tree at all, oils that come from trees, from the wood or the bark, like sandalwood and cedar wood and rosewood, help you kind of, if your day is making you sort of wither a little bit, and you smell one of those, it'll help you stand tall in your world.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the leaves, and this is the whole point of the story, this is where photosynthesis happens. And that's where the plants breathe.
Right.
Any of them will help you breathe.
Right.
And then we get up to seeds and flowers. So things like fennel and some of the spices, but like back to bergamot, help you with digestion. Think food, digestion. And then things that come from the flowers themselves, we use in spiritual blends and for perfume. So that's where the plants are having sex.
Right.
And if the perfume works, maybe you're getting lucky tonight, right? So it's just a mostly so quick guide to where did the oil come from.
Right, very cool.
So virtually any leaves, all of them will help you breathe.
Right.
So for air strikes, if somebody's getting a cold or has a cold, I would always start with eucalyptus. There's several different kinds and they work differently, but because it's cheap,
Yeah.
and it's koala food.
Yeah.
And some of the mini species.
And they grow like weeds wherever it grows.
Yeah. I bought a couple of little from Breck's. Isn't it called Breck's Gardening in Ontario? And it's a mail order place.
Oh, I don't know that one.
And I bought a couple little like bedding plants in 4-inch pots. And their first summer in pots on my back deck, they grew 9 feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now what do I do with them? And so that year when I brought them in for the winter, they realized it was fall, so we better let ourselves fall, and all the leaves fell off. So when I bought some new ones, I just kept them indoors, and the leaves never fell off again.
Yeah.
So the two most popular species are radiata and globulus. And radiata has more components that are actually antiviral. So it's better for protection if there's a cold going around and you're just trying to avoid the cold, or putting it in a diffuser. But globulus, which has a much stronger smell because it's got ketones in it, and they're going to be even that much stronger of an expectorant.
Right.
But if you stay in a steam room for too long, because of the ketones, you're going to get bloodshot eyes and that sort of thing. And we wouldn't use those during breastfeeding or pregnancy, at least the first trimester, because they're just too strong. They get in the bloodstream and all that. But those are the two most common ones. So virtually any of the leaf oils, and back to basil, this is back to where we started today, basil and tarragon, even though I'm allergic to the tarragon pollen, I can work with the oils. And eat it, like I said, in salads and things. But tarragon's one of the best ones, or basil, at telling those mast cells to take the morning off.
Right.
So you use it before exposure. And then if you have a big problem with seasonal allergies, pollens and that sort of thing, and this is back to where I sidetracked from bringing up Linda Codnar. She's the one that introduced me to a little Chinese blend. And like so many Chinese herbs, it's almost free.
Yeah.
It's called just P-E, 2 letters, M-I-N, Min, K-A-N, Wan. P-Min Can Wan. And Wan in Chinese just means tablets.
Right.
So you get a little bottle for about $4. And you don't use it like an antihistamine. You just, if you've got those problems, you just take it every day. There'll be a dosage guide like three times a day or whatever. And it's recommended that you take it for at least a month every day. And I had this allergy for my whole young adult life. It was probably a 20-year or longer allergy. And P-Min Canwan ended it forever for a total cost of $27. You know?
Amazing, yeah.
And so I did it for full on for 2 summers in a row. And then I started just keeping it with me, and even the sign of a sniffle or my eyes getting a little going, I would use it for a week. And then just in case, I kept it with me traveling on holidays or whatever. And again, if there was any semblance of something starting, I would take it maybe even just one day.
Right.
So for a total cost over 5 years of $100, I ended a lifelong allergy.
Amazing.
So P-Min Canwan, and I was surprised. I Googled it this morning, and it comes up in Google with a whole bunch of Chinese wind symptoms and all that stuff that I don't understand because I'm not a Chinese doctor. But it's got all of the long stuff there. Came up with several sites, and that surprised me and warmed my heart. So just P-Min Canwan, P-E-M-I-N-K-A-N-W-A-N. And there's a couple different brands of it, and they're these little green things that look like Smarties. And the ones that I took were coated, so they really looked like Smarties. And a lot of things, some of the Chinese herbs that are very bitter, like berberini, for example, you can get them coated or uncoated.
Right.
Most people think, and they're right, that the bitterness is part of the function.
Yeah.
So having the uncoated ones is probably better.
Yeah.
But there's one, they're always in a little green box, and the brand that I always used, the whole box was green, and then just in white letters it said P-Min Canwan. And another brand that I tried when they were out of those was more of a white box with green letters. It was the other way around, but probably identical formulas.
Yeah.
Or I forget what the percentage is. If you're going to knock off somebody else's formula, the name and the recipe has to be at least, I don't know, it's not very high, 10% different or something like that. Like if
Right.
you change the actual amount of 2 ingredients or something, then you can knock off a formula. But the brand that I always started with and always used was a fairly dark green box, about this big with a little bottle in it, white plastic bottle, and it's recommended that you take it for, I think it says 27 days on the body. Take it for a month. The first time I used it, I just stayed on it for the whole rest of the summer. And the next year, a shorter version of time.
Yeah.
And then better after that. So I can't recommend P-Min Canwan highly enough. It's cheap, it works. I've recommended it to hundreds of clients and patients and fellow practitioners over the years, and it's worked for everybody.
Yeah.
Like it's just one of those.
It's one of those like ancient formulas, really.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Oh yeah. It's probably been around for thousands of years.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, good. I'm glad we circled back on that because I knew you had a story around clearing your own.
If I watched this later and realized I forgot to mention P-Min Canwan, I would have gone and beat my head in against a mirror. Yeah.
Oh, good. Well, the other thread that I just wanted to follow on is kind of the eustachian tubes, ear infections. So you mentioned that you didn't want to put, direct essential oils like into the ears. I like that advice, kind of around.
Yeah, I would stick
pitter-patter.
to. Yeah, I would for the whole pitter patter stuff. I would use back to, this is sensitive skin, so back to about a 5% blend.
Yeah.
And my favorite single oil would be marjoram,
Okay.
especially Spanish marjoram, because it's got a warming effect, as well as still, it may be a half and half cut of Spanish marjoram and something like Eucalyptus radiata.
Right.
Even though Spanish marjoram has quite a few of the alcohols in it that eucalyptus does, or you could use tea tree too. It's just harsher on the skin. It stinks as far as I'm concerned. So I would use, marjoram on its own, or mixed with some eucalyptus or tea tree, about half and half.
Yeah.
And then cut to 5%. And around the whole ear and here and all the way down towards the lips with pitter-patters, little circular motions
Yeah.
and pitter-patters. And that'll usually take care of an ear infection within a couple of days. It's amazing how many young little people end up getting operations done and tubes put in and all sorts of things
Yeah.
when all they really needed to do was get off milk.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry to be so negative
At least
about that.
the
but
conventional store-bought pasteurized homogenized.
yeah,
grain
if I
fed.
had, we talked about that, if I had a healthy yard with a cow in the backyard, I would probably drink its milk.
Yeah.
Or I'd rather have goat milk, I think, but whatever.
Yeah. Raw, fermented, all
yeah.
the good stuff.
And
So what about this idea of, garlic ear oil or with mullein in it? I know that's a very common remedy.
oh yeah, mullein and garlic together, absolutely. Thank you. There again, it's a maceration, so you don't have to dilute it because it's already just, somebody might have had it sit in a sunny window for a few days or whatever.
Yeah.
And mullein is one that we never used to see around here. I would seldom see it any closer than the Okanagan area.
Yeah, it's true.
But we proved, Terry had one that showed up in his yard right in the middle of his echinacea patch. And he swore that some student must have come in midnight or whatever and stuck it there. And it made it through a few winters.
Yeah.
And mullein, it's highly variable again, where depending on where it's growing. I've seen mullein in bloom, in full bloom, right in the middle of railway tracks where the whole plant was only this high.
Yeah, totally.
Where normally, and I put some mullein in my, on my front boulevard gardens that got, if you left it alone, easily 7-8 feet high.
Yeah, amazing.
And some of them would do like a saguaro cactus,
Right.
where it usually just goes straight, but it can branch out too. You get this,
Yeah.
and that's kind of cool. And it's also kind of a fun one. I like having it around for botany classes because normally when you get an arrangement, whatever the flower arrangement is on a plant, it's referred to as the inflorescence, spelt the same way as inflorescent light bulbs. And if each little flower has a stem on it, that's one thing. But if each little flower is attached directly to the stalk, the main stalk, it's called sessile. And most of them grow, and like evening primrose, for example, may be in bloom here, but it's already forming seed down here, and there's still buds on top.
Right.
Fireweed does that because it's
Yeah.
in the same family. That's called an indeterminate inflorescence because it just keeps growing until frost kills it. So it'll just, you can have fireweed that's like 9 feet high and it's seeded away. And that's part of why evening primrose is so expensive, because it's not a crop that you can just grow and combine.
Right.
Because the seeds, even a hard wind will blow the seeds out of the little cups. So they're hand-picked, and they make even poppy seed look huge. They're these
Right.
really, really fine seeds. So you have to go hand-pick the ones that are already in seed, while the ones in front of you are in flower, and there's still buds coming.
Wow.
So when it grows that way, it's called an indeterminate inflorescence. But a few plants, like Liatris, which even grows wild here in the south of our province, the ones you buy in the store get about 3 feet high, and they're another butterfly flower, I think. They start at the top. They grow up and start blooming here, and then they grow down towards the ground. So that's called a determinate inflorescence, because the first flowers determined how tall it was going to get.
Right, okay.
Okay? But mullein is the only one that grows, it's like popcorn going off. Like there's flowers here and there and here
Right,
and there
that's
and here and
true.
there, all over the place.
Yeah.
And so it's got a nice effect, a soothing effect on the mucous membranes, which is why we might use it for a sore throat, but also with ears and things. And it's combined. So we take mullein and just any nice oil. I mean, olive oil would be fine. Anything you have in your kitchen, and crush up some garlic and the mullein flowers, and leave them in a sunny place. And that's called a maceration or an infused oil, and that could be put right in the ears. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
But I would still do the whole this bit too,
As well.
along with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, mullein is so neat. We recently got actually 2, and I'm sure there's many more, but 2 in the last week. Incredible testimonials regarding, we did a blend for the, the fires and the smoke and that kind of thing, and it could be used in that situation, or if somebody has coughs, colds, that kind of thing. And mullein, we call it our longevity.
Yeah.
And mullein's number 1. And so one of our new staff, her husband is a firefighter. So he's been up north, and it's kind of shift work. You do 10 days,
Yep,
you come
yep,
back
yep.
for 4 kind of thing. And she's saying just as soon as he got home, they just like hit him, with the longevity blend, a few other things, and just like tremendous difference. And we had another lady just post a review yesterday. She's like, I hope you keep making this. If not, I'm buying buckets just so I can have it around. It's the mullein is amazing that way.
Yep.
And it's incredible, hey, that a tea works, tincture works, oil works. I mean, people even smoke it, to kind of get that similar kind of
Yeah,
smoothing.
mullein's one of the ones in the no tobacco smoke blends.
Yeah.
And it was smoked in the time of our indigenous people passing the pipe as part of ceremony. If you ended up smoking too much passing the pipe and had a bit of a cough, then you'd have a bowl full of mullein, which would end that.
Right.
Like it would just end the coughing.
Yeah.
One smoke would treat another. My mind was stuck in EO mode and forgetting about things like mullein. Apologies. But any leaf oil, hyssop is a bit hard to find and a bit pricey, but I would start with tarragon, which isn't that hard to find and not too expensive. Hyssop, if you can find it and afford it. Basil would probably be a good one. And back to if you're just stuffed up, and that's part of why I threw that oil in my pocket, even though I was using it on my feet on the way over. If you take something like either, depending on which smell you prefer, spike lavender or eucalyptus radiata, either they have the same chemical profile, so whichever one, and they're both cheap, and add just to 10 drops of either of those two, 1 drop of peppermint.
Right.
And back to airstrikes or put it in the diffuser or whatever. That's a really cheap blend. I used to have people come up to me at shows when I used to do booths, and I didn't have a blend yet. What did I even call it? Once I made it, I don't know. But I'd always have some mint around just as a breath freshener. And if people were complaining about stuffed up sinuses, I would let them smell the eucalyptus and the spike lavender and just say, pick one. And they'd pick one. And I would dump, take the dropper top off and dump a little spurt onto the carpet, and then fill it with about 10 drops of peppermint and just say, there you go.
Right.
It's $10, kind of thing.
Yeah.
They were cheap blends. And so I finally just made a blend that way with a couple of leaf oils, and I know I used tarragon in it. But again, it worked best before sensitivities, not after,
Right.
once there's snot coming out of everywhere.
Yeah.
Back to what I was saying about mast cells, that's my theory on how it works. But
Yeah, I like your analogy of the leaves, for that respiration.
yeah,
And just to remind everybody, needles are technically leaves, even though we
Right.
don't call them that or think of them that. They are a leaf.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, black spruce is one that a lot of people like just for even relaxing. I think the black spruce that I was getting was out of Quebec
Okay.
from a tree farm
Right.
that became a distillery.
They say that that's good for the adrenals too.
Yeah.
So just when I heard you say relax,
Yep, absolutely.
but also restore,
Yep.
in that way.
It's sort of, some applications of oils that way are, you don't have time, you don't even own a vehicle, and you're really, really busy. You can smell something like black spruce or any of the other pines and things like that at your desk in a downtown office 20 floors up, and just close your eyes and pretend you're in the forest. And affect your neurotransmitters the same way as if you were actually there.
Yeah, forest bathing.
I had a student once years ago, I haven't thought of her until just now, probably mid-20s, and she had completely lost her sense of smell, and for years. And I sent her home with a leaf oil blend, and at the next class, no, it was just passing the bottle around in the room. She was crying, and she came running up and gave me a hug and said, "I can smell, I can smell, I can smell."
Oh, wow.
And we could easily explain that as just she was so stuffed up that even just the terpenes themselves, simple monoterpenes in the blend, would have melted a whole bunch of mucus.
Right.
And getting back to her, she had nasal receptors. They were just so buried in mucus.
Yeah.
But she hadn't smelled, and she shared with the class that her head immediately, when she deep breathed an airstrike with whatever that blend was, she was walking or running up a sunny path on the farm that she grew up in somewhere out around Airdrie. She was back on the farm again as a little girl.
Wow.
And she was crying what the ladies like to call happy tears, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Gosh, I haven't thought about that for years.
Wow. Yeah, so many cool threads in this conversation, that idea of, the perfume, that direct connection to God, which is also our, the nose and the sense of smell, the most directly connected to our brain, and I would say our consciousness, and that idea of like respiration, which, inspiration, right? It's like to be inspired, which is to be alive, right? There's so many kind of threads and connections there.
Well, and back to a lot of your work with regard to phenylethylamine.
Right.
The three most common ways to access phenylethylamine, which is very much a happy thing,
Yeah.
is
The love molecule.
good chocolate,
Yeah.
roses,
Oh, yeah,
or an orgasm.
for sure.
And I always like to say, if we could take a room this size, invite 100 friends over, and fill the room armpit deep in roses first,
Right.
which would cost you a fortune, of course. Within 20 minutes, everybody would be walking around laughing their heads off and just totally glowing, because there we are. So the old practice of showing up for a date with a box of chocolates
And some
and some
roses.
flowers, especially roses.
Yeah.
It's kind of like roses were the primer,
Right.
and you were hoping to go out and have a good time. But if the guy was a loser and you came home by yourself at the end of the night, the chocolate was the consolation prize.
Yeah.
And you're probably in bed eating a whole box.
Right, yeah.
That was the consolation prize. Yeah, the date was a bust.
Actually, I don't know if you've heard this reference that Terry shares about phenylethylamine. I went to a conference with him one time, and he was speaking at it. It was all about chocolate, and the whole buzzword was the PEA, the love molecule, so on and so forth. And as you shared, Terry was talking about, yeah, it's that feeling. It's that, like, we get it when we orgasm. Like, it just produces that euphoricness. And he says, well, it's interesting that we have receptors in the top of the roof of our mouth where that can get absorbed. Because otherwise, when you kind of like eat the chocolate, right, it just kind of goes, it gets broken down and digested. But isn't it interesting that kind of intuitively we have this kind of, just this romance with chocolate, like letting it melt in your mouth. And chemically what's happening is as that melts, those molecules are getting absorbed and go just straight to the brain, right?
Yeah.
And it's this like,
well, some of it gets in there. We have there's little holes in the top of your palate.
Yeah.
Called the what do they call the nasal palatal canals. That's why when you're chopping onions, you cry,
right?
Because the onion juice is quite hard on your eyeballs, so you start crying to flush the juice off your eyes.
Right.
But it gets right up in through your, like when you take a couple drops of peppermint orally, you can keep your mouth closed, but it's in your sinuses in 3 seconds, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Nasopalatal canals, that's what they're called.
Cool.
So the chocolate would get there, just not as quickly.
Totally. So Terry's joke, in his sense of humor, right? With the chocolate, the sensualness, letting it melt in your mouth, getting this like kind of like, brain orgasm thing going on. He says, that puts a whole new spin on oral sex.
And there we are with smiles on our faces just thinking about it.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Hey, well, it's been a fun chat today.
Once again.
Yeah, right on. Good times.
Back to you.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. Post your comments, share this out. And we'll be back next week, episode 7.
Okay.
Right on. Have a good one.
Bye for now.